Being born can kill you. Sewage water can kill you. Scarlet fever can kill you. In Victorian England, death was a part of everyday life. It wasn't as prim and proper and idyllic as you'd think. The leading cause of death in the Victorian era, according to the University of Leeds, was being born in the first place. Instances of stillbirths were so common that simply being born was the biggest killer of the times. The causes of stillbirths were many, from poor maternal nutrition to inferior birthing facilities and personnel, and even many easily communicated diseases and infections inflicted while the fetus remained in utero, to name a few. In one major British cemetery, St. George's Field, more than half of those interned during the era didn't live to see a 10th birthday. Granted, adults had plenty of ways to die in Victorian England, but infants and kids were at the greatest risk of untimely demise. Today, people have a perfectly good understanding of the disease tuberculosis, also known as TB. It is a highly infectious illness caused by the bacterium Mycobacterium tuberculosis. It primarily afflicts the lungs, but it can also have severe effects on other parts of the body. It can cause fevers, nausea, aches and pains, seizures, extreme fatigue and confusion, and of course, death. While today, TB is much easier to treat, in Victorian England, it wasn't well understood at all. It was then referred to as consumption because of the way it wasted the body away. According to Thorax, tuberculosis was usually a death sentence to those who caught it, and it seemed to cause a person's body to veritably consume itself from within. In fact, in the early decades of the 1800s, as many as 1 in 4 deaths in the UK were caused by TB. According to the Mayo Clinic, bronchitis is an inflammation of the lining of your bronchial tubes, which carry air to and from your lungs. The condition usually develops following a respiratory infection like a cold, the flu, or COVID, and in most modern cases is easily remedied with medical attention if it doesn't just ameliorate on its own. In the Victorian era, however, it was a different story. Back then, bronchitis was responsible for as many as 8% of deaths in the UK, according to the Journal of the COPD Foundation. While the grim statistics are clear, that bronchitis was a killer, and a bad one at that, what's not clear is how often the issue was acute bronchitis or chronic bronchitis. Acute bronchitis was often due to another infection and led rapidly to complications and death. Chronic bronchitis, however, could slowly weaken a person for months or even years and was exacerbated by things like smoke and pollution, ever more present problems in the industrializing England of the times. Either way, it was an unpleasant way to die, with the sick person slowly suffocating within their own body, while suffering fever, cough, chills, aches, and other symptoms that could worsen steadily. In Victorian England, so-called convulsions were a leading cause of deaths for infants. They were so-called convulsions because doctors of the day called all sorts of things convulsions when they really had no idea what to properly call the underlying symptoms or sickness.
I'm talking to a patient. Out, please! I'm terribly sorry, sir. We have a lot of trouble here with bogus psychiatrists.
Though, according to the University of Leeds Library, it was understood as early as the late 18th century that the seizing and spasms, often termed as convulsions, could be caused by a myriad of factors. In fact, the cause of death given for babies in the 19th century was simply listed as convulsions in many cases. The seizing and spasms were often accompanied by fevers, chills, pains, coughing, and many other symptoms that to a modern medical practitioner may have revealed the real causes of affliction. But according to the journal Child's Nervous System, it was believed by many doctors of the day that convulsions could be brought on by anything from bad digestion to exposure to loud noises or overly bright lights. Treatments for those babies who lived through a bout of convulsions could include everything from bloodletting via leeches to exposure to ammonia to the administration of purgatives. Though not quite so lethal a prospect as being born, giving birth was a deadly prospect for many mothers in the Victorian era. As many as 4 to 5 out of 1,000 births resulted in the death of the mother, according to the journal Medical History. Boil that down a bit, and you get the figure of 1 out of every 222 births ending up with maternal mortality. The reasons that childbirth could be deadly for Victorian mothers were many. Often, an extreme loss of blood led to death during childbirth. Often, diseases picked up during the mother's birthing process led to death. In a cruel twist of fate, giving birth in medical facilities was much deadlier than giving birth at home, according to Mental Floss. This was the case because in the 19th century, many of those in the medical field still lacked a clear understanding of how infections were spread. The common practices of our times, such as sterilization of tools and facilities and even basic hand washing, were rarely done, which made matters worse. According to Healthline, scarlet fever is an infection that can develop in people with strep throat. It's characterized by a bright red rash on the body, along with high fever and sore throat. The illness usually afflicts kids between the ages of 5 to 15, and today it is usually quick and easy to treat with a routine course of antibiotics. In the Victorian era, however, it was quite often a death sentence for British kids. As many as a third of children who came down with scarlet fever in those days would die as a result of their sickness. Those younger than 8 years old had the highest risk of mortality. Tens of thousands of children died from scarlet fever during the 19th century. 20,000 Britons succumbing to the disease in the year 1840 alone, as per statistics gleaned from Castle Bromwich Graveyard. Even those who did recover from the illness could have long-lasting maladies, such as permanent deafness, one of the most severe results for those who survived their affliction with scarlet fever. Pneumonia remains a common cause of death even well into the 21st century, but it was even more prevalent as a killer in Victorian times. While pneumonia is often the technical cause of death, it almost always comes on only after the body has already been severely weakened by a different illness. According to Johns Hopkins Medicine, pneumonia is an infection of one or both of the lungs caused by bacteria, viruses, or fungi. In other words, it's an infection that can be brought on by quite a diverse range of afflictions. Because the onset of pneumonia usually came after a patient suffered with another sickness, it was often called the old man's friend in the Victorian era. To be clear, it was by no means entirely painless or at all pleasant. A person who develops pneumonia experiences lungs filling up with fluid, phlegm, or pus, making it harder and harder to get oxygen into the body and effectively resulting in a drowning death, though one often precipitated by unconsciousness. Dropsy was also a leading cause of death in the Victorian era, despite the fact that it was a mere symptom of an underlying issue, not the killer itself. Today called edema, dropsy is a swelling of the body, often in the lower extremities or the hands, caused by an excessive retention of fluids, according to Medline Plus. While this condition typically manifests in the hands, it can also happen anywhere in the body. The actual causes of dropsy are usually a partial or complete organ failure. It can be brought on by congestive heart failure, by the kidneys shutting down due to illnesses like diabetes, by liver failure caused by sickness or heavy alcohol use, or by other causes. Regardless of the underlying cause of the dropsy, it is a symptom of a severe, often deadly underlying cause, but in Victorian-era England, it was often listed as the cause of death itself. The doctors of the day did at least understand that dropsy was an excessive accumulation of fluids, naming the malady for the Greek word for water, hydrops, according to the Cambridge World History of Human Disease. If you close your eyes and picture England in the 19th century, chances are good you'll call to mind images of finely dressed gentlemen and ladies strolling the grounds of elegant manors, of dashing hunters pursuing foxes through lush woodlands, of the pomp and ceremony of the royals, and of a generally lovely place, all told. But the reality was anything but lovely for many Britons of the day. Reading select passages from Charles Dickens can create a more accurate picture of the abject urban squalor in which many English men, women, and children lived during the Victorian era. And with that squalor came sickness. One particular disease thrived in these close, highly unsanitary conditions, and that was cholera. According to the Science Museum, the lack of access to clean water and the absence of effective sewage systems created an endemic of cholera in London in particular, which first reared its deadly head there in the 1830s. Those sickened with the bacteria causing the illness would have horrible diarrhea and vomiting, which led to life-threatening dehydration. They could also experience rapid or irregular heartbeats, fever, rashes, and total exhaustion. Since cholera was barely understood and essentially untreatable at the time, it ravaged many cities of the day. Gradually, understanding of the disease would prompt improvements in civic sanitation infrastructure, which became a silver lining despite all the suffering and death. An accidental death can, by its very nature, happen to any one of us at any time, and as a result of countless factors, things were no different in Victorian England. According to Changing Hands, Industry, Evolution, and the Reconfiguration of the Victorian Body by Peter J. Capuano, factory workers were at particularly high risk for accidental death as there were essentially no safety measures in place to prevent accidents. In fact, there were rarely ways to shut down machinery quickly, so in many cases, what could have been an injury, though a catastrophic one to be sure, would result in death. According to Chimney Solutions, chimney sweeps of the era, who were often young children, often became trapped inside chimneys and suffocated to death. As morbid as it sounds, this fate ironically saved them from the cancers often developed as a result of their work and would have later killed them anyway. Another surprisingly common cause of accidental death from younger Victorian-era Brits was drowning after falling through ice, according to York Cemetery. Other accidental deaths occurred around farming equipment, the ever more common railroads, as a result of horse and carriage accidents, and on it went. Not surprisingly, no one during the Victorian era was immortal. Everyone died eventually, and in many cases, the cause of death was attributable to nothing more than a person simply growing old. The Victorians called death as a result of old age natural decay, a term that might not be all that sensitive, but is accurate in its own objective way. According to the University of Leeds, natural decay was given as the cause of death in countless cases during the 19th century, and the term was still in frequent use for much of the 20th century as well, despite its ultimately ambiguous meaning.
I'm 81 years of age. I have rheumatism, a collapsed uterus, am morbidly obese, and deaf in one ear.
Today, it's called dying of natural causes, and such a death usually comes for people well into their 70s, 80s, or even 90s. In Victorian England, the onset of the natural decay preceding death was expected much earlier, often starting when someone was not much past 50 years of age. While natural decay alone may have sounded like a sufficient explanation for a death back then, today, one does not literally die as a result of advanced age, but according to Business Insider, as a result of some other cause that the age-weakened body cannot survive as well as it would have in younger, healthier years. Today, it is a medical success story par excellence. Smallpox has been eradicated from the human population at large for more than 40 years, the World Health Assembly having declared humanity free from the disease on May 8, 1980, according to the CDC. But in Victorian England, smallpox was still very much around and very deadly, as it had been since antiquity. According to the UK National Archives, smallpox killed about 30% of those who caught the disease in the mid-1800s. Things got better after the year 1850, when the British government began mandating smallpox vaccinations for the population, but in echoes of our times today, there were also many Brits who opposed vaccinations and refused to be inoculated against the disease for fear of side effects. Mandatory vaccination policies were dropped by the turn of the last century, arguably delaying the eventual eradication of the ancient disease. Despite many fervent temperance movements that influenced many in Victorian-era England, the 19th century was a hard-drinking time for many, and a drug-using time as well. The Victorian Yearbook from 1889 compiled numbers from previous years, with the mortality rate increasing year over year. According to the Bulletin of the History of Medicine, chronic alcoholism was a crushing condition for many Britons of the day, with premature death a regular result. While many succumbed to alcohol-related issues like cirrhosis of the liver, the compounding issues were many, including essentially unrestricted access to strong drink, contamination present in improperly prepared booze, and accidents that occurred during drunkenness. And according to Mental Floss, another substance was also quite the killer of the era: opium. Used in all sorts of medical applications of the day and abused recreationally as well, opium led to the premature deaths of tens of thousands of Victorian-era British folks, and many of them were entirely unwitting victims, in that they were kids. It was quite common in those days to drug kids with opium-derived tinctures in order to ease pain, induce sleep, or in some cases, to simply force a young child into a stupor so he or she would not need tending while their parents worked away the hours of the days. Not surprisingly, little bodies did not do well dealing with hard drugs, and death often resulted.